I'm Sunita Sarabji, health editor at Ethnic Media Services and co-producer of our Friday briefings with my dear colleague, Pilar Marrero. Over the past 3 weeks, we have witnessed with horror the mass deportations of so many people, many of whom have committed no crime. ICE has been instructed to arrest at least 1,200 to 1,500 people per day. And according to data from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, at least 8,000 people have been deported in the past 14 days. The majority countries of origin were South and Central America, but ICE data also shows a significant number of arrests and deportation of people of Indian, Chinese, or Russian origin. In fact, a plane load of deportees were sent back to India on Saturday, including those with credible fear of persecution asylum claims. Speakers this week will discuss how immigrants can protect themselves when ICE agents show up at their homes, workplaces, and even chillingly schools. They will also discuss immigrants' rights while in ICE detention and what rights detainees might have if they are sent to detention centers in foreign countries, which unfortunately I think is something that we are looking at the moment. Our guests today are Viridiana Carrizales, founder of ImmSchools, Amanda Alvarado-Ford, Deputy Directing Attorney at the Immigration Institute of the Bay Area, Oscar Sarabia Roman, Staff Attorney, ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project, and Maru Mora Villalpando, immigration activist with the group La Resistencia and CEO of Latino Advocacy. Speakers, we are indebted to each of you for your valuable expertise. Reporters, we will take questions from you immediately after each speaker presents. So let's begin with Maru Moral Villalpando, who will discuss the rights of people being held in ICE detention. By way of introduction, Maru has been on the front lines of detainees holding hunger strikes to protest squalid and difficult conditions in detention. Welcome, Maru.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I apologize in advance that I'm going to have to leave exactly at the half hour. So I am the founder of La Resistencia, a grassroots community group in Tacoma, Washington. It's been around for almost 11 years. And we came together to respond to the largest so far hunger strike in a detention center back in March of 2014, where over 1,200 people went on hunger strike and called us to support them in that side. So since then, we work directly with people in detention in the Tacoma Detention Center and their loved ones to make public the detention conditions. Throughout the years, we have seen waves of hunger strikes, different sorts of actions that people in detention take to bring attention to the conditions. This is because people in detention are aware that some sort of grievance system exists, but there's absolutely no response to their grievances. As a matter of fact, the grievance system nowadays is more complicated because tablets are being used for almost anything in detention. And so unless you are familiar with the technology and also English, because the tablets are not in different languages, you cannot really access the grievance system. If you do, ICE is supposed to have up to 5 days to respond to this. In the experience that we have all these years, people when they submit grievances, the responses are usually, no, you have to talk to GEO, no, you have to talk to ICE, and back and forth. Many times there's no response. And many times, if there is a response, it's in English. So people have to figure out on their own what it means. There was even a report from the Inspector General in 2023, that acknowledged the fact that the grievance system doesn't work. And that is one of the many reasons why people go on hunger strike. Last year, Resistencia kept track of how many hunger strikes happened. And just last year, there were 14 That's one for 14 strikes recorded by Resistencia. That doesn't mean that those are the total. Usually there will be other strikes that the organization doesn't hear of, right? Because we have 3 phone lines that people can call throughout the day, every day, but not everybody has access to our numbers, and not everybody has money. So part of what Resistencia does is also mutual aid, sending money precisely so people can call either us or their loved ones. The main demands that people have had throughout the years about going for the reason why they go on hunger strike is food. The quality of food is horrible. So that's why people say usually it's not a problem to go on hunger strike because we don't need the food anyway. Um, the lack of clean clothing. As people arrive to the detention center for years, people have said that they're not given new uniforms or new underwear. The underwear they're wearing is already being worn by somebody else and they can't tell. Also, a completely lack of medical attention. And at some times it's completely negligence, medical negligence. Nowadays, what we are hearing a lot is a complete lack of hygiene. Why? Because in this detention center, we fought for many years to bring a lawsuit against GEO, the corporation that owns and manages the detention center, for putting people to work in detention for $1 a day. In our state, in Washington State, we have a law that no matter your status, when you work, you have to get paid, and you have to get paid the minimum wage. So we won that lawsuit, and since the winning of the lawsuit, GEO stopped this program, and so they really refused to have anybody cleaning because that was the main job of people in detention, cleaning the facility. Throughout the years, this happened in 2021. Throughout the years, they continue hiring crews here and there, some people, but the people that they hire to clean out from outside cannot keep up with the level of cleanliness that is necessary. This is because GEO refuses to actually pay what they should pay to keep the place clean because their bottom line is profit. And so due to that, we have also seen an increase in illnesses, especially infectious diseases. just this month, last month, we saw varicella outbreak, and right now there's another COVID outbreak. There's at least 1 unit in quarantine. And last year, we saw 2 people dying, one in March, one in October. Both of them were in isolation. Charles D. O'Daniel died after 4 years of isolation in segregation. Out of those 4 years in segregation, only 2 days he was sent to general population, and he died by himself in this isolation unit. The other person, Sanchez Castro, Jose Sanchez Castro, he died in medical isolation. He was put in the medical isolation without any kind of follow-up on his fentanyl withdrawal, and he died 5 days later. And all of this reflects the fact that although there's supposed to be basic rights for people in detention, and there's supposed to be some sort of processes for people to actually convey the grievances that they have, there's no channel whatsoever to actually get their grievances resolved, to get their conditions better. So every time they go on hunger strike, they try to negotiate. And ICE and GEO will come and say, sure, we'll give you more chicken this time. We'll give you 1 hour extra of TV, and that's the end of it. So sometimes conditions do get better, but then later they go back to the same problems. And you will see as media that if there's a hunger strike, ICE will send you a long paragraph that says, we do understand that people have the right to express themselves, yet there's immediate retaliation. So the last thing GEO wants and ICE want is for people to go on hunger strike and make anything public. So there will be immediate retaliation, either by separating them from the unit, sending them to solitary confinement, or even sometimes transferring to other places, or deportation, immediate deportation. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions. It's a really long topic, but I think I'm right on time, finishing on time for others to also speak. Thank you.
You are exactly on time. We got a couple of questions in by email from Aitana Vargas. So I'd like to start with her. And then there are a number of questions for you in the chat as well. So Aitana, could you please ask your question for Maru? She may be having trouble unmuting. We'll go to Henrietta Burrows and then we'll circle back to Aitana. Henrietta Burrows of East Palo Alto today. Will you please ask your question?
Thanks so much, Sunita. Maru, when people usually think of deportees, they think primarily of Mexicans being deported, but you mentioned other groups. Could you give a breakdown of some of the other ethnicities of people and where they're being sent?
Yes, I mean, here we have seen a large group of people from India coming from the past in the past 2 years. As a matter of fact, Randir Singh, one of the hunger strikers for the past 2 years, he was in detention. He was recently deported just this week. We assume he was in that military flight to India. But there's been a large population from Southeast Asia here. There's also a lot of people from Cuba at some points. Sometimes it changes. Definitely, we have seen a lot of Ukrainians and Russians being detained here, especially people that come from prisons. So regardless of you finishing your sentences and, supposedly no double jeopardy here, well, it does happen in immigration. So we see a large population of Eastern Europeans that have been finishing their sentences, as well as Cambodians. So it depends what's going on politically in the world. You will see those populations risen in detention. Obviously, Latinos are the largest population because we're misrepresented in general. In the fact of being racialized in detention and deportation. But I would say that right now the largest group in detention that we have seen, at least here in Tacoma, is people from India.
Interesting. And Maru, how successful are these hunger strikes when they happen?
I think they're successful in the sense that people are paying attention to what detention conditions are. Even politicians, we have mobilized politicians, even if they don't want to actually acknowledge the fact that the detention conditions are horrible. We have been able to actually mobilize both the city of Tacoma and the state to take action. So we have been able to pass state bills to precisely have state agencies take on jurisdiction of this business, because it is a business. So in the past, they will say, oh, this is a federal entity. And we'll be like, no, it's a private business. And that's why we won the lawsuit, which is in appeal right now, but it's moving successfully on our side. And then this state laws that obviously, when we go to the Supreme Court, we might lose with the kind of Supreme Court we have, but at least in the sense of being able to mobilize and acknowledge state agencies that they have a role to play in this detention, and they should make sure that if we're going to have a detention center, at least conditions should be the basic human conditions that they need. In that sense, that's how it's been successful.
Interesting. Renee Barbie has a question, which I don't know, Renee, if you want Maru to answer your question or if you want to wait, but ask your question now and we'll see if Maru is the correct person to answer it.
Okay, my question is, we live in Pomona, which is a sanctuary city. I was told that I should not come into sanctuary cities to remove illegal immigrants or undocumented citizens. Is that true?
I want to let probably Oscar respond that I could answer, but I don't want to take much time.
Oscar, do you want to respond to that question now?
Yeah, so ICE can go into any city that they want to enforce federal law, but what they can't do is force local officials to enforce federal immigration law. So they can't force local sheriffs to help them in enforcing any of the federal immigration laws, which is what the administration is trying to do now. But unfortunately, yes, ICE can go into any city to arrest if they also have a judicial warrant, which I think other panelists are going to get into as well.
Thank you.
And Maru, just to clarify, people in ICE detention are folks with valid fear of persecution claims. Is that correct?
I mean, there's all sort of people. Yes, there could be those that do. There could be even legal permanent residents that are being accused of past crime, maybe for 20 years ago. There's all different sorts of reasons why ICE feels that someone should be detained. There's even U.S. citizens that have been detained and deported, right? Because ICE doesn't believe that they are U.S. citizens because they don't look like white people. And so in our experience, there's all different people from all different backgrounds, but mainly they're poor and they're people of color. And so even those that are probably facing an accusation, right, of a crime, but their process has not ended yet. Yet they were removed from that process and put in detention, which it will guarantee that at some point they will lose that case because they cannot defend themselves in that process. So there's a little bit of everything everywhere.
Interesting. Elena Kuzitsnova from Slavic SAC has a question and comment. Elena?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, thank you. Actually, a comment considering Russian speakers, Russians, Ukrainians who are in detention. Yeah, right now there are many Russians who came here to get political asylum because of the war, and even those who passed the border using CBP-1. It's official entry, but they are, in real fear that their application for a political asylum won't be granted. And Ukrainians who came here on U4U program, it's type of parole, and there are already cases when new applications are not accepted for U4U for Ukrainians, and it's granted for 2 years, and those who want also to extend it, their applications are also I can't say not accepted, but they're kind of pending, and people are are lost. They don't know what to do because some of them literally don't have the house to return. I mean, the Ukrainians who fled from war. So, and just also writing a comment may be useful. We recently published a little like a recommendation from American Association of Migration Lawyers, who gave really very good instruction. It's very small, it's very clear, it's not the consultation. What rights the immigrants have. They highlight that it doesn't matter if you are documented or not, you still have the rights, and they give this very good recommendation. I'll put the link in the chat, just maybe someone will be interested in this.
Thank you, Elena.
Thank you.
Yes. Maru, before we let you go, ICE says that it's currently at 109% capacity. Do you think that this is creating increasingly squalid conditions for detainees?
It definitely does. It has an impact, as more people arrive. For example, here in the detention center in Tacoma, people are already complaining about the lack of hygiene when the numbers were half of the regular capacity. Now that it's reaching more than half, obviously it will have a huge impact. I was talking to another journalist just before this call, and I was saying, can you imagine you're already stressed and anxious? How would you feel being next to 100 other people, stressed and anxious 24/7 in the same unit for who knows how many weeks, months, or possibly years, right? The other reality is that we're not certain whether they have reached capacity because there's not that many detentions as they promised they would. You all know about the fact that ICE changed the timestamp on their press releases on their website to appear as they just happened, right? Which they didn't. And we're in touch with many other groups like ours, checking on, what's going on in our cities. And we haven't seen the mass, rates that they promised. They are very, it seems, targeted. They do take people here and there that were not in the, intended, but, they grab other people. But it seems it's more like about the theatrics and the optics of it. That's why the military planes, which they have used before, it's not new. But it's also the dehumanization of people. And I thank Viridiana for the comment that we invite you to not fall for that kind of rhetoric that the system uses to excuse our detention by calling us illegal. Illegal is an act, it's not a person, right? And we are people. I was undocumented for many years, and I called myself undocumented because I just lacked the documents. That's it. It's just the lack of a paper. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maru. And I encourage reporters to get on Maru's email list. You'll have a story pretty much every week for your publication. So we move on to Amanda Alvarado-Ford, who has been practicing immigration law for over 2 decades and also served as a pro bono attorney with La Raza. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to speak about know your rights and the types of advisals that we give to our clients here at Immigration Institute of the Bay Area. And just in my practice, which has been a practice as an immigration attorney representing low-income immigrants, since I'm Spanish speaking and the daughter of Mexican farm workers, I do tend to have a client base in my deportation defense nonprofit practice that is Spanish speaking primarily, but I have represented individuals in deportation or asylum proceedings and other applications from Asia, from Africa, from other places as well. So I want to start out by saying when we give a Know Your Rights presentation to undocumented community members, we emphasize this is not the time to panic. What we want to do is recognize that we have rights, that we have power, and so it is a message of power, not panic. As undocumented people here in the US, we still are entitled to constitutional protections, especially the protection to remain silent, also the protection and the right to be free from unlawful searches and seizures. And I'll get to that in a moment of what that means in the context of an ICE officer presenting themselves either at your workplace or at your home. And I'd like to start the discussion by speaking about expedited removal. And so currently we are in a climate where the Department of Homeland Security has expanded its capacity to execute expedited removals. And what that means is Customs and Border Protection has the right to rapidly deport non-citizens who either are here undocumented or who've committed misrepresentation or fraud when speaking to an immigration official in certain situations. So the reason why we start our discussion here is because expedited removal, where someone could be removed from the country in as short a time as a day, is key, because if you're undocumented and you've been here more than 2 years in the US, then you actually have the right to a hearing. And so that's really key. And having proof of documents showing that you've been here those 2 years is also really key. Having those documents in a safe place where not just you, but your loved ones know how to access them so that you could present them to an immigration judge if you need to is very important. And so that's a key part of the inquiry where we start our discussion with Know Your Rights. Also, if I'm undocumented, but I've submitted an application either for asylum, for a U visa for survivors of crimes who are immigrants here in the US, a T visa if I'm a survivor of trafficking here in the US, or VAWA for victims of domestic abuse, either by a lawful permanent resident spouse or USC or lawful permanent resident child over the age of 21. I want to have a copy of that receipt notice, probably actually on the photos in my phone, so that I have that just in case I need it, in case I have no choice but get arrested by ICE and I need to explain that I've got a process pending. Another point that I want to mention, and I think it's really important, is we have 2 scenarios. We have pre-arrest by an ICE official and we have post-arrest. So before one gets arrested, we have the right to remain silent. And that is a really important right. We don't want to say anything. We never want to lie to an ICE official. We always, first off, pre-arrest, we want to maintain our right to be silent, and we can assert that right in a respectful way. And I would recommend a respectful tone so as to avoid any undue harshness on the part of an ICE agent. We also want to remember that if we encounter an ICE agent at our front door, we have the right to insist upon a judicial warrant. We have the right to see it before we open the door. We don't want to open a door to ICE at home in the absence of a signed judicial warrant. What that means is from the U.S. District Court, signed by a judge. And oftentimes ICE will present an ICE document signed by an immigration officer, but not by a U.S. District Court judge. And so if we have ICE at home making a knock at our front door, we want to let them know we have the right to remain silent. Please show me that signed, whatever you have, please show it to me either in my post box, which I can access inside my house without having to open my door. You can slide it under the door, or they can hold it up to the window. And you want to scrutinize that carefully and not feel rushed, as hard as it might be. We have to remember to breathe and remember our rights, and remember we're looking for that signature by a judge from a U.S. District Court. Most times they do not have a signed judicial warrant from a U.S. District Court. Most times it's an ICE immigration official who has signed an ICE Department of Homeland Security warrant for alien arrest, which is not a signed judicial order. So that's really key. And once we realize, okay, that's just an ICE warrant for alien arrest, then we want to tell the ICE officer, I would like you to leave the premises, please leave. And I have the right to remain silent. And I also have the right to speak to my immigration attorney. And one should not hesitate to say that whether they have an immigration attorney or not, because one can always obtain an immigration attorney, or one's family can obtain one. Now, if one does get arrested by ICE, then at that point, we want to speak up. We want to say, I have the right to speak to my attorney. We want to mention, if we have a fear of returning to our home country, that's the time we want to mention that, because that entitles us to a right to speak to an immigration attorney. And especially if we've got more than 2 years presence here in the US, even if we don't have documents, we want to assert that right away so that we get that hearing before an immigration judge. The last thing I'll mention, and then I'll open it up to questions, is in the workplace. Also, if ICE enters our workplace and it's an office setting or some sort of other business which is not, say, an agricultural field, then we have public spaces in our workplace and private portions of our workspaces. So while an ICE agent might be able to get into a reception area, and that would be the public space, they are not entitled to enter our back office, where we have our private offices with doors that close, or employees only are allowed. And I would encourage all of us in our workspaces here in the US to put up clear signage about what is the public workplace and what is the private area where only employees can enter. We can deny entry to ICE for any private employees only area. And we can even in the public spaces tell ICE, show me whatever it is that you have. And if it doesn't meet the standard of the U.S. District Court signed judicial warrant, we can ask them to leave and make sure that they do not execute any unlawful searches or seizures of people or property, whether it be home or work. And I'll open it up to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. We have a number of questions for you, but Fatma Bakit and Jessica Martin asked the same question about those judicial warrants. Is there somewhere where we can see an example of what a judicial warrant looks like versus an ICE warrant? And what's the best way to distinguish the difference?
Right. I think the best way is really to see the examples. And I do have a Know Your Rights presentation that I can forward after today's press conference. And so perhaps I could forward it to you, Sunita, and then you can distribute it. And we even, when we're giving our Know Your Rights presentations, I actually print out copies of a valid judicial warrant by a U.S. District Court. We are currently in my office in the Northern District of California. And so I have a sample of that, and then I have a sample of an ICE warrant for alien arrest, which I dislike the word alien, but that's the word that's on the document, and that is not a proper warrant.
Okay, interesting. One final question for you. Viji Sundaram is working on a story, and she has a question for you. Viji, please ask your question. I'll ask it for her in the interest of time. If an airline passenger coming into the US is ordered off a plane, should she comply even though she tells them she has a visa, valid passport, and a ticket? It happened recently to a passenger sitting in a plane in India.
So that's an excellent question. So she had a valid visitor visa or some other visa, and she was ordered off a plane by CBP, or do we know?
We don't. May I ask the rest of the question?
Please, yes.
She had a visa coming to the US. She was sitting with her daughter, who is a US citizen, and the woman was in a wheelchair, but they ordered her off the plane. And they said to her, "You can't wait she said, "I have nowhere to go. My daughter and I are heading to the US," and they said, "You can't stay in the airport and wait for anyone to come pick you up. You have to go outside the airport and wait for a ride back home."
So I think I would probably need to learn more about the facts of that case. I don't know why they were denying her. And what country was she in when she left?
India.
She was in India, so they wouldn't even let her.
Yeah, the plane was about to take off, and then they came in and said, "Get off the plane."
Yeah, that's unusual. So I would have to learn more. It sounds like that individual needs a consultation with an immigration attorney, and we always encourage folks who have these questions that are unique to their own situation, because I would need to learn more about the type of visa she had and how did I don't know if it was US CBP who had issued that order. We'd have to scrutinize the facts of that case, but make sure that she gets an opinion from a qualified licensed immigration attorney in one of the 50 states, and not a notario or someone holding themselves out as an attorney, because those people in Latin America, we have notarios who are licensed in various countries in Latin America, but not licensed immigration attorneys here in the US. And we see scams and fraud happening widely. And so I would just caution her to make sure she's talking to a qualified attorney. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. There are a couple of questions for you in the chat, and I hope you can answer them there. We move on to Viridiana Carrizales, who will discuss the rights children have when ICE shows up at a school site. She will also discuss how educators and parents can work together to mitigate fears for students and their parents and create safe havens at schools. Welcome, Viridiana.
Thank you, Sunita, and hello, everyone. I'm losing my voice. I also have this cough. I'm hoping to get through this with no issues, so bear with me. So I'm Viri Carrizales, and before I share more context about how this issue is specifically impacting our students and their families in schools, I'll share that, this is something very personal for me. I was an undocumented student myself. My parents were undocumented. We came walking through the desert to come to this country when I was 11 years old with my mother and my younger sibling. And, we came here like many immigrants in search of better opportunities, better educational opportunities specifically. And, I started this organization, ImmSchools, 8 years ago, with the purpose of changing the experience that I had in K through 12. When I got here to the US, one of the first things that I learned very quickly was that schools were not safe for me, and the schools were not safe for my parents. And I got those messages by having one of the front office school staff ask for a driver's license to a parent that went in. I remember overhearing that and telling my parents, "Don't come to school because you don't have a driver's license." When I was a senior in high school, I told my high school counselor that I didn't have a social security number, and he thought that calling immigration to see how they could get me one was the best thing. So I found myself talking to an immigration official sitting in my high school counselor's office. So I started this organization because no kid should ever be afraid of our schools, should never be afraid of the same places that are meant to protect them. And, for the last almost 8 years, we have been working with schools across the country to ensure that teachers, front office school staff, principals understand the rights that students have and are better equipped to support those students in our classrooms. So we've been training educators, and we have also been providing information directly to students and their families to ensure that they know those rights and that they're able to exercise those rights. Of course, all that is happening, right? I say that because this is not new. This is not the first time that we're hearing rates, that we're hearing separation, that we're hearing about the impact that immigration policies, especially anti-immigrant policies, have, and especially has on our kids that are in schools. So, with the recent changes in policy, especially those changes that impact schools or kids in our schools, that has caused a lot of fear in immigrant parents who are questioning now whether or not they should bring their kids to school. Some parents have already withdrawn their kids from school. So this is alarming and this is harmful. It doesn't matter, what sector, what we do, what profession. If we don't have kids in school, if we don't have kids attending schools, we all lose. And we're all impacted by that. Right now, there's approximately 5.5 million children in K through 12 who are either undocumented or who reside with one undocumented parent. 5.5 million kids. The majority of them are US citizens. Kids that were born in this country that have undocumented parents. This is what's at stake. Having 5.5 million families who are wondering and asking and trying to verify with their schools whether or not they should bring them to school, whether or not it's safe to have their kids in a school bus. So something that we're trying to do is make sure that we're informing not only educators about the legal rights that students have in K through 12, regardless of their immigration status, but we're also informing our families of what those rights are. So for folks in the education space, in the schools and districts, our students have certain legal protections, as Amanda mentioned, under the Constitution, but specifically in the schools, there's a landmark decision that happened in 1982 called Plyler v. Doe. And this decision stated that every child in this country, regardless of their immigration status, regardless of their parents' immigration status, have the legal right to be in K through 12 schools. This is the reason why we have millions, 5.5 million students in our schools. And through Plyler v. Doe, a school cannot require, cannot ask, cannot collect or document any information regarding a student's immigration status. A school cannot ask a parent, are you undocumented? Is your kid undocumented? That is against Plyler v. Doe, and that is a violation of our students' rights. So it's important, one, for educators to know that our students have the legal right to be in our schools. And under this protection of Plyler v. Doe, schools cannot collect information or ask or required about a family's immigration status. This is why schools do not know who is undocumented and who is a US citizen in their schools. They don't have this information because they cannot capture this information. Okay, so, and then in addition to that, we also shared with our educators about FERPA, which protects the privacy and confidentiality of our students' records. Any information that a parent shares with a school is protected under this Privacy Act. So that means that if an immigration agent comes into a school, they cannot automatically be giving information about a student because they have to follow the law and that information is protected under FERPA. So in order for that information to be shared, the school has to ask for permission for the parent and ask the parent, do you give us authorization to share this information? Another way that an immigration agent, and really the only way that whether it's police or immigration, has and can get access to students' record is through a judicial warrant. And as Amanda mentioned just a little bit ago, it's really almost never does immigration officials actually have a judicial warrant. And will they have something like that to come? If an immigration official has an arrest warrant, an administrative warrant, something that is not judicial, that does not give them the authority to get information from our kids. Many schools are implementing protocols and practices and policies at the school level to ensure that the principal, the front office school secretary, that everybody in the school knows what the plan is and who is in charge of speaking and interacting with the immigration agent. What the schools are trying to do is to prevent any disruptions of our students' learning and to make sure that our schools continue to be safe. And one of the things that we're also telling families is about those laws, right? Like even without the sensitive locations memo that used to classify schools as safe places, as sensitive location places, even with that memo being rescinded, our schools and our students in particular still have those protections under Plan Vido and under FERPA. So this is a reminder, something that I continue to tell parents, bring your kids to school. Yes, be aware, be alert, be safe, but bring them to school. Because ultimately, a lot of us came to this country so that our kids could have the chance of a better future and a better life. And it all starts with education. So let's make sure that they don't take that right that we have away from our kids. And I will open it up for questions that folks have.
Thank you so much, Viridiana. I'm sorry, I'm stuttering on your name.
Okay.
Nicole Chang has a question for you about DACA status. Nicole, please ask your question.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to ask a question. So, a lot of students try to looking for an, DACA, and it's still, some of them are still DACA status. So what is their, what can I say? What is a legal stance on this, executive orders or like an ICE activity? So anyone can explain about it? I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole, for that question. I'm actually not an immigration attorney or an attorney, so I don't feel comfortable responding to that question. I wonder if Amanda or others in the team have more context, specifically and advice for folks who have DACA.
Amanda or Oscar, would you like to take on the question?
Oscar, I could speak to it, but if you want to, please, by all means.
Oh, go ahead. I can add.
Okay, so so the question was, what advice do we have for people with DACA at the moment? So I would say definitely see a licensed immigration attorney with expertise in DACA applications. Right now, since Trump administration won, we've only had access to renewing DACA status. And what we want DACA recipients who are in valid status to do is to get an assessment by a qualified immigration attorney for two reasons primarily. One is to see if they could qualify for advanced parole for an educational or career work-related reason, to get permission to travel for those purposes and their window of time. So the parole document gives their permission to engage in a either work-related or personal emergency trip outside the country, and then the parole is permission to re-enter the U.S. With that documented parole re-entry, it's seen as a valid lawful entry that they could then utilize if they marry a U.S. citizen at some point in the future, and they could adjust their status and become a green card holder here in the U.S. Without having to leave the U.S. The other thing is they could be screened for other possible immigration remedies like a U visa, a T visa, or other possible applications they would qualify for. Oscar, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Everything is right. I think it's hard to give general advice for DACA, and I echo Amanda's recommendation to see an immigration attorney, especially because a couple of weeks ago, the Fifth Circuit ruled against DACA, but it limited its decision to just Texas. So people living in Texas would have different recommendations and actions to take than people living at other parts of the country. So yeah, I would echo what Amanda says, and please see an immigration attorney.
Thank you. Viridiana, before we let you go, there's a question from Henrietta Burrows, which is quite chilling. Henrietta, please ask your question.
Thanks, Sunita. I read a story just last week about a substitute teacher, I think this might have been in Texas, who contacted ICE and reported several students saying that they couldn't even speak English. And these were teenagers, I think, and there was a photo of ICE escorting them from the school. So what could have been done in a case like that? And is what the substitute teacher did illegal?
Good question.
So yeah, I know that this substitute teacher using social media to sort of make a request and say, hey, I'm teaching at this school and my students. So I know that that was verified and it happened in Fort Worth ISD. I also know that as a result that substitute teacher was terminated from the district. I did not see a picture of ICE escorting any students out of the school. So I've not heard of anything like that. And I know Maru mentioned this earlier too, like there's a lot of stuff out there. And at this point, we don't know what is true and what is not true, but I have not heard of any verified cases where immigration is gone inside of our schools and escorting students out. So I cannot comment on that because I haven't heard. But again, it's important for schools to know that our students have rights and that unless immigration shows a judicial warrant, and even within that warrant, right, like there's specific areas of the schools, if it's listed, that can be searched, which is why we always advise school districts to have their legal counsel or attorneys be the ones who are actually interacting with immigration agents so that they can verify the validity and the legality of the documentations that they're presenting. Because, as a front office school secretary, as a school principal, as a teacher, you're not trained on how to read a judicial warrant. You're trained on how to teach your kids. So we're trying to, again, make sure that, this is all handled by attorneys from the school district, and also just for us to be very aware. And sometimes we share information that could continue to cause panic, and that could be really harmful for our students and for our families. And I know that this has been the case with raids or eyes of folks seeing ICE or saying ICE was here and that ended up not being true. It's just causing a lot of panic, which is why we have to be just very cautious about what we shared, and make sure that everything gets verified.
Viridiana, thank you so much for your comments today, and I hope your voice does get better. Our final speaker today is Oscar Sarabia Roman of the ACLU. Oscar will discuss how civil rights organizations are pushing back to fight Trump's deportation directives. The ACLU filed a lawsuit last month, and I will drop a link to that lawsuit in the chat. Welcome, Oscar.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and focus on some of Trump's executive orders and actually 3 lawsuits that the ACLU and its partners have filed challenging these policies. But I'm happy to answer questions about any of the other executive orders or policies. The first one that we filed was against the executive order on birthright citizenship, which we filed within 2 hours of Trump signing that executive order. Birthright citizenship is the principle that every baby born in the United States is a U.S. citizen, which now the administration is seeking to upend. This principle, however, is enshrined in the Constitution's 14th Amendment, which guarantees the citizenship of all children born in the United States. There's only one narrow exception of children of foreign diplomats that doesn't apply here. This means that many expectant couples across the United States, even those on visa, now fear what will happen to their newborns, which could, for instance, mean that they could be denied things like basic health care and nutrition. This puts the newborns at great risk at such a vulnerable stage of life. So we are suing to stop this illegal executive order, which is cruel and contrary to what America stands for. And so far, 2 courts in two separate but similar lawsuits have agreed and have enjoined this illegal executive order already. So there's good news there. Next is the attack on asylum. Under the 212F proclamation, the administration is also seeking to completely shut down asylum at the border. And this move would put thousands of lives at risk. Under the proclamation specifically, which falsely cites, quote unquote, an invasion as justification, to deny asylum, families and individuals face return to countries where they are at grave risk of prosecution with absolutely no recourse. But Trump's actions here ignore explicit protections, and this is important, that were put in place by Congress and backed by the courts for generations that ensure people have a chance to have their asylum claims heard. So this proclamation really is unprecedented compared to previous attempts to shut off asylum, because this move leaves absolutely no avenue open for people to seek asylum at the border. So we are suing to stop this ban on asylum because no precedent has the authority to unilaterally override the protections that Congress has explicitly afforded those fleeing danger. And I think finally, we are challenging the expansion to expedited removal, like Amanda mentioned. She discussed a little bit about this. The administration is attempting to use this fast track deportation policy to fuel its mass deportation agenda and really rip communities apart. This policy targets immigrants nationwide, like Amanda said, who cannot prove that they've been in the country continuously for 2 years or more. But due process requires them to get a fair hearing, which this rule strips from them. So to put a little bit into perspective, under this rule, immigrants who have been integrated into and contribute to our communities would actually get less due process contesting their deportation than they would contesting a traffic ticket. So we are fighting back against this new rule that tries to circumvent due process. And really, it's an attack on US communities, on our Constitution, and really our fundamental American values. And the last thing I'll end on, because I think important points are worth repeating. Like Amanda mentioned, despite all of these executive orders and change in policies, constitutional protections still apply, like the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. So this means that, like Amanda mentioned, you have a right to remain silent. You have the right to ask for a judicial warrant and not let ICE into a house or a private space within a business, school, or hospital, unless they present that judicial warrant and not an administrative warrant, which is not valid. So it's important to keep these in mind and remind all people, non-citizens and citizens alike, to assert their rights.
Oscar, thank you. I'm going to start with a question from Aitana Vargas. Does harboring an undocumented immigrant break any federal laws? If a U.S. citizen is married to an undocumented immigrant and they live together, is this viewed as harboring an illegal immigrant under the law? And if so, how often are these crimes prosecuted across the U.S. and what's the punishment?
Yeah, so the harboring and transporting smuggling provisions under 8 U.S.C. Section 1324 have normally not been prosecuted for things like being a spouse or just being associated with non-citizens. However, the case law is very different depending on where you live on all circuits. So it's hard to give general advice and say that simple things like that will not be prosecuted. And especially because the Trump administration has put out a memo saying that they're going to seek more prosecutions under this section, which could vary of who gets prosecuted under what criteria. Normally, you need specific intent where you are specifically intending to harbor that person and furthering the evading of detection. But again, all of that, it varies by circuit. So what I actually would recommend and what we recommend as an organization is to talk to a criminal defense attorney in your area if you feel unsure about whether you will be prosecuted under this section.
Thank you. Henrietta Burrows has a question again. Henrietta.
Thanks, Sunita. It was mentioned earlier that the percentage of white Americans has fallen to 60%. So do you think this attack on immigrants is meant to keep the percentages of other ethnic groups low and to keep the current power status quo as all part of Trump's the MAGA movement's keep America what America has been?
Yes, and I think that's almost clear in the birthright citizenship executive order and the history of the cases that birthright citizenship is based on. We have seen throughout the history, for example, the Chinese Exclusion Acts, of how they try to keep people of color and minorities out. And this is really rooted in white supremacy and those practices. So we see time and time again, different type of precedents, different type of people try to push this through to obviously reduce the population of people of color. So I think you are correct, Henrietta, that this is part of the aim and the goal.
Oscar, we have a question that came in from email. Moving detainees, many detainees may be shipped abroad. Do they still have constitutional protections if another country hosts them?
So, for example, we've heard a lot of stories of a lot of detainees being transported to Guantanamo, and that situation is still in flux. Nevertheless, whatever that situation may be, it will depend on what authority is asserted and what agreements there are, if it's with other countries. But non-citizens arrested in the United States have rights, and the government has a duty to respect those rights, especially as long as those non-citizens are in government's custody. So at minimum, they should have a right to counsel, even though the government won't pay for it. And they should still be able to contest removal to their home country. Obviously, we'll see if the administration honors that, and if not, we will challenge that.
Thank you. A final question comes from me. People are being returned to countries from which they have claimed asylum, and in many cases with credible fear of persecution. We're returning them back to that country. Are we essentially putting a target on their backs?
Yes, I think we definitely are. That's a violation of not only US asylum law, but international humanitarian law and possibly conventions against torture, which Amanda can obviously speak more to, as those are the types of cases she deals with regularly. But broadly, on a policy and federal level, yes, that is something that we should not be doing. If that is occurring, we should be bringing challenges to that.
Nicole Chang has a question before we let you go. Nicole, please quickly ask your question.
Yes, thank you. Because there was a public charges rule where kind of secure all the immigrants when the previous Trump administration. Do you think that public charge rules will be revived against immigrants? Because, for example, like asylum applicants, they can get some federal government services, and they're afraid of getting that services because of public charge rules. So, can you please explain and what is your expectation about that?
Yeah, obviously, we don't know exactly everything that the administration is planning, but it is certainly possible for them to do this. And given their rhetoric and what they have said in the past and their actions in this first couple of weeks, it is possible that they might target non-citizens and applicants through this. But again, either us or other organizations would challenge that, just like we did during the first Trump administration.
Oscar, and to all our speakers, thank you so much. This was an incredible briefing packed with so much information that readers and viewers need to respond to this crisis. Reporters, please join us again next Friday when we discuss the looming threats to newsrooms. Have a great week.